Hey, we are live with the one, the only, the incomparable Chris Johnson, PT, joining us from the state of Washington. Exactly where in Washington are you, Chris?
I'm about 20 minutes north of downtown Seattle in a lovely community called Edmonds. Technically, I believe it's a city. So people know it as the first ferry stop to the San Juan Islands. So people act like I've moved to Canada. I'm a little bit closer to Canada, but still probably have about a 75-minute drive.
Got it. And yeah, anyway, if you guys go check him out, he's always kind of sharing some of the beautiful scenery over there, and also the scenery in his background, which doesn't have the background there now, but that's all right. Quick shout out to my sponsor here for the podcast, LMNT, drinkelement.com/fitcare. I got grapefruit in my bottle here, staying hydrated. Have you tried that before, Chris? You're a big endurance athlete. What do you think of the electrolytes there?
That's the first thing that goes down the hatch in the morning. So I wake up and I have a 16-ounce pint of water and an Element. And I was actually afraid to try the chocolate. And I have no financial or professional relationship with Element, but yeah, it's a great way to start the day. And then I invariably drink too much coffee.
Did you try the chocolate at all? Was that?
Yeah, someone sent me a sampler pack, and it was the last one that I tried because I kept putting it off. I'm like, oh, this chocolate is probably nasty. And I ended up having it, and it was delicious. So,
have you tried it in your coffee though?
I have not. I
think that's the hack.
Yeah, but I love
that's
mochas.
The hack right there.
Yeah, so that maybe tomorrow morning.
I think you'll like it.
Yeah.
I think you'll like it. All right, moving on from that, guys. Chris has been kind enough to, I don't have the full link. You wouldn't be able to click on it anyway, but you go to his website, Clinical Running Essentials. That's one of the things we're talking about today. He added a code, BONOS. That's right here, BONOS, over there under Chris's beard, right under there. And that's giving you $100 off of his course. And I'll talk real quick about the course. And one of the reasons when I signed up for his course about a month ago or a little over a month ago, right when he launched it, I was very excited to dive in. And I said, hey, let's jump on. Let's talk about this. Gave me kind of a month to go through all of the content. It's a very deep course. And again, I'll just say for anyone not familiar with Chris here, any of my listeners, get familiar with this, guys. If you are a clinician who works with runners, you should be taking his course. This should be required material, in my humble opinion. And if you are a runner, you should either be following him for a clinician who's given out free advice, or you should be working with somebody who has taken his course. If you have someone locally, you prefer to work with someone locally, totally understandable. There's folks, again, I think, Chris, I don't know, you're open to virtual clients? I know you have some.
Yeah, virtual in the state of Washington. So I get people reaching out from all over the world, and having to navigate that is always a pain in the what. I end up triaging a lot of people because a lot of people end up reaching out for coaching, and I say this is not a coaching situation. This is physical therapy. You're dealing with a primary complaint of pain and or a functional limitation. So call it like it is. But yeah, I have a roster of athletes as well as patients. So all fun. And another thing I'll say, just for the runners out there listening, endurance athletes, triathletes, all that good stuff. High rocks now is kind of, I don't know if you'd consider that in that ballpark. You started seeing some of those injuries and things popping up as folks are getting more into that. But I would just say, folks, again, even if you don't have an injury, don't wait till that injury. Check out some of this stuff. And the big thing, too, that I think Chris, when he was putting out that course that I was very eager to dive deeper into, and I think we'll talk a little bit about it, is bone stress injuries. So if you've heard of having a stress injury, if you've ever had a stress injury, these are things that a lot of clinicians can miss very easily. Chris does a really good job, really thorough job of going through that. Now, the course is pretty dense for the layman if you're not in the medical profession. But again, something to look at of where's your pain, what's happening. Again, a consult with someone like Chris or somebody who's gone through the course like me, go figure, it might be valuable. And again, just going through his course,
is not enough to make me an expert in bone stress injuries, but I do think I would defer to Chris Johnson here as one of the foremost experts in bone stress injuries, possibly in the world, especially when it comes to runners. I don't know if you take that title. I'll give it to you.
There's some brilliant people out there between researchers and clinicians, and I've been at this for a while, which means I've made a lot of mistakes, and I've made it a point to learn from those. And I'm always flattered when a clinician of your caliber who has been out practicing for a while has moral authority as someone who's lifted and spent time running and triathloning takes this course. And, we're going back and forth in terms of a lot of messaging. And, for someone like you to have a lot of epiphanies and, just higher level learnings means the world to me. And I think it reminded me that if I can say so, I hit the nail on the head, but this was honestly 25 years in the making, man. I mean, you and I knew each other back in New York City when we were both overconfident and naive, right? So
I think I'm still that. No, humility. Humility comes the Dunning-Kruger effect for anyone who knows that one. I did an episode on that at some point, but cool. Chris and I think when I took a quick job, there was like an injury or whatever. I took a little like per diem job at Lenox Hill Hospital that turned into a little more of a full-time thing for acute inpatient care there. And I think, Chris, you had just left NISMAT, where you had spent a pretty hefty amount of your career. And I got to sit in with the rounds with the students and things like that. They were doing some of their education. And I got to sit in with that and then go up to NISMAT, which was kind of connected to Lenox Hill Hospital there, one of the top institutions I'd say in the world, and get to learn from those guys. And again, you mentioned your mentor, Mal. I think he's the first one I ever heard about tart cherry juice and the research behind tart cherry juice. And I was like, whoa, what is that? And he had all this strong research, just threw it down. I was like, whoa, that is pretty cool. I started drinking it because at the time when I was at Lenox Hill, I was just getting into the triathlon. Your kind of resume is you were at University of Delaware working with Lynn Snyder-Mackler, who again, when I was a PT student, that was one of the whatever she puts out, let's check that out and make sure that's in our brains, because that's going to be the emerging kind of at the forefront of orthopedics and the physical therapy space especially. And then you switched over to NISMAT again, where if you want to talk a little more about some of your learnings there, again, I think I've listened to a lot of your stuff even through your course and now other podcasts, making sure to prepare, listen up to this. So you talk about these things a lot, but would love to get a little, if you want to give shout out to a lot of those guys. I know you like to give credit standing on the shoulders of giants.
Yeah, well, I think that it all started when I had transferred from Delaware. So I started off at University of Delaware my freshman year and had an incredible experience, academically, athletically. I was the sole freshman on the tennis team. But after I wrapped up my freshman year, I was talking to my older brother who still lives in New York City. And, he said, look, if you have an interest in economics or finance, you should try and get into the best program you can. And, I sort of followed that advice and I got up to Boston College. I, sent resumes to Georgetown, University of Pennsylvania, and then Boston College. They probably thought I sent them to the wrong address, but long story short, I transferred to Boston College, and I remember sitting in a financial accounting class and I'm saying, no freaking way. Like, I cannot, live the rest of my life if this is my profession. And it works great for other people, but I was going through injuries and, I was in the midst of recovering from a shoulder procedure and transferred back to Delaware because I just had this calling. And fortunately, I was still in their system, and I seamlessly plugged back in and just had an incredible undergrad experience. Didn't even know that they had a PT program until I started doing some rehab there with a guy named Dennis, who was working in their PT department. And that's when the journey began. And, I just go and knock on doors. And one of those doors happened to be Lynn Snyder-Mackler. And I said, look, I was looking at the school bulletin and I see you do research. Do you need an extra hand in your lab? And she's like, absolutely. I'd love to have you on my team. And, I was there for the next, essentially in her lab for about 4 to 5 years. And that started off as when I was a sophomore in undergrad, and then stayed there for PT school, just because it was a natural fit. And through those connections and relationships, um, I was just around a really dynamic group. Just to shout out a couple people, Scott Stackhouse was one of my primary mentors, Jennifer Stephen Lapsley, Terry Chmielewski. So I was spending time in Lynn's lab as well as Stuart Binder-McLeod's lab. And I probably had no business being in either of those labs, but they must have seen something in me, maybe, a motivated person who, again, was a little bit naive, but, I was asking a lot of questions and I was curious. And then through those relationships, I ended up at NISMAT with Mal, because Mal and Lynn, I don't know if they collaborated, but they had a mutual respect for each other as researchers. And, once I got up to New York, that was my 10-year, I don't even know what you call it, but, that was one of the most amazing decades of my life, to grow as a person, to grow as a clinician, a professional, and what better place in New York City to do that, and just to go experiment in all sorts of ways. And that's where I met my wife, and what ultimately brought me out to Seattle, and then had to sort of start over all again. You and I both, right? So that was very humbling. And here I am at the ripe age of 46 with a gray beard, living the Pacific Northwest lifestyle. Yeah.
And two beautiful kids, right? Two.
Yep, 6 and 9, live in Kai. They're awesome. I had Kai at the dentist this morning, so fun times, busy times.
We just took our kid to his 30-month checkup, and his middle name maybe somewhere in the back of my mind, maybe subconsciously, but Kai is actually my son's middle name as well. So,
oh, cool, awesome.
I'm a big fan of the ocean and the sea, so that's the tattoos there. And so Kai in Hawaiian means sea. I don't know I assume you knew that. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, that was the impetus for the name. And before Mimi gave birth to Kai, we were vacationing over on Kauai, and we were sitting having coffee at this fancy resort. We weren't staying at the resort. We walk over there to have a coffee in the mornings, and this woman came over, and we didn't know the sex of the child yet, and she came over, and she was this like very motherly Hawaiian woman, probably in my partner Mimi, and she said, "You're gonna have a baby boy, and he's going to represent the ocean." And we're like, "What is going on?" So yeah, short anecdote.
Yeah. And you mentioned that this entrepreneurial endeavor, and changing things to shift gears a little bit back to the professional side. And so, setting up in Washington. I think in New York City, again, my recollection, I think I was around 2010, 11, where we kind of overlapped a little bit. Fortunate for me. And again, I went and saw you for like a little knee tweak I had. You gave me a few things I've still used to this day, 15 years later. So again, thank you for that. And again, for anyone going to check out your material online, I think it's just a wealth of information there. And I wanted to also throw in, again, from the course, little things like a long lever bridge, where I think a lot of clinicians might stop at just a basic bridge, and not know the difference of what the muscle activation patterns are, again, how to load that hamstring tendon and things like that. So without going too nitty gritty on the details, and folks, like I said, should just go take the course, but and use that discount code bonus for $100 off. But in New York City, again, I think you had started to set up as a bit, at least in my world, as being like, oh, this guy's kind of in that top tier echelon of folks who know what they're talking about, especially when it comes to endurance sports again. And so moving over to Washington, I'd love to hear about your experience setting up shop and kind of establishing yourself in that kind of niche.
Yeah, it was a grave challenge, and I think something that I was, in hindsight, not fully prepared for in terms of the transition. Being in New York for over a decade, I had developed deep roots there, and it was fun. And that was a tough thing to walk away from, because I was connected with all the big docs in the city. I had an elaborate network of physical therapists, you being in that network. And when I moved out to Washington, I didn't know anyone. I fortunately had enough of an online presence where certain folks in the endurance space, namely triathlon at that point, were familiar with my work. But to avoid being a flag to the banks, we wanted to get a house just to sort of like secure our position out here. I had to take a job, and fortunately, Olympic Physical Therapy, who has since been taken over by ATI, gave me a staff position. But I quickly realized that I was unemployable, and I they did not give me internet access during my treatment hours, even though every single person who was there on my schedule got to me through the internet. But I operate on a different schedule, and I plugged in for about maybe a little over maybe a year and a half, and then I just realized I have to get back out and do my own thing. And that wasn't like I set up shop and all of a sudden everyone came flocking to me. I was seeing patients out of Harriet Sports Performance, now called Metier. And, the first day I took on clients, I had 3 people, and I'm like, hey, this is going to be great. And I think those folks ultimately wanted to just support me, knowing I went out on my own. But then I had several weeks where, maybe I would see 1 or 2 people. Maybe I wouldn't see anyone. Now, I was lucky to have saved up some change from my time in New York, one of the few who escaped New York without a monster, debt. But so, I was able to ride that out, and, but it also forced me to get into other things, teaching. I started coaching a little bit more. And, I think when you're in these situations, you can look at them a couple different ways. And I always say, what's the adventure that I'm signed up for? There's going to be some turbulent times, but this is going to be an adventure, and I'm going to have deep learnings, not only about my professional work, but who I am as a person. And, nothing scares me more than, predictability and just falling into this lull of doing the same thing all the time. So, it took me probably a few years before I really, felt like I got back on my feet. And, I have certain folks to thank. I was just giving a shout out to Ben Wapker today and the whole Lake Washington physical therapy crew. They really extended themselves to make sure that I did have a little bit more of a smoother transition than I otherwise would have. So, for people who are thinking of, braving it or rolling the dice, realize when you do that, you're going to have a safety net that forms, and, they're going to catch you, and, there's going to be some volatility. But what's the worst thing that can happen? Things don't work out. You go back to work for someone, right? But think about the possibilities if things do work out, and then you start to basically craft your story and you control that patient experience, which I can't think of anything more empowering as a clinician. I don't have to worry about looking over my shoulder in terms of, am I billing enough units? Sometimes I have people reach out to me, and if I consult them and all signs are pointing towards a high risk bone stress injury, I say, look, I'm not charging you for this session. We need to get you in for imaging, and we need to, have you connect with a couple other people in terms of referrals. But this is easy. There's no charge for the session. And, it's all like, I have these, these are my core values. One of them is trust and transparency. Well, 2 of them, trust and transparency. So that's allowed me to operate in harmony with my core values and deliver that patient experience that, people are yearning for. And once you find a clinician who you lock arms with, it's on, right?
I did want to I forgot in the introduction to introduce you as the MedBridge guy. For any physical therapist who use MedBridge, you might not recognize him with the thick gray beard, but yes, I forgot to mention that. A lot of great takeaways there, Chris. I'll try to echo a little bit there, but yeah, I think even going back, telling your story about, setting up and kind of just volunteering in the lab, for any of those younger clinicians or students out there finding that passion. Something I always talk about is, you just got to get your foot in the door, and what's the worst that happens there is that, Lynn could have said no, and you would have been, you would have found another opportunity to take your passion and energy. And then the same thing with, this entrepreneurial piece. And yes, I have my own practice. And yeah, it's always a struggle of time, energy, finances, stability, all those things. So obviously everyone has different situations that they have to think through, but yeah, the possibilities of it working out are pretty amazing when you really start to break it down, and having that your brand and having your life set up in a way that people are coming to you and you can do the thing you love with, it's clear in your space that, again, if somebody has that bone stress injury, I definitely and even like anything close to that, I say, go check out Chris. And again, hoping to pick up even a little bit of that, and be able to, catch a few of those. Cause again, you say it in your course a lot, but that bone stress injuries, how many of those have we probably seen in our career? And we didn't see them, but they saw us, as you as you say, and just by not having all the required education around it, and just being like, that's located where on your tibia, and how long has that been going on, and that kind of stuff. And it's pretty interesting. And again, like I said, I think any clinician should definitely be taking your course. And again, any runner should be looking out for these kind of concepts and making sure they're priming themselves if they take their running pretty seriously. Yeah, and again, that entrepreneurial piece has been very interesting for me. But I want to leave the focus and the spotlight on you, sir. And you talk about respecting the process. And again, you share a lot about a lot of your various injuries over the years. I was just listening to you on that Jacked Athlete podcast, and they do a lot of interesting stuff about tendons, and tendon is a super interesting topic I'd love to hone in on as well. But you mentioned your injury running up to the net and having that patellar tendon right down to, was yours, I think I heard you saying, was down to the tibial tuberosity?
Well, yeah, I've had a couple different flavors. That tennis injury turned out to be an avulsion fracture at the inferior pole of my patella, and that was a devastating and debilitating injury. I had no clue what I was getting into, but that also started the adventure, and that's what ultimately landed me on a road bike, because I was at the University of Delaware. And while my friends were, partying and getting into trouble, I was out on my road bike or mountain bike, because there's incredible mountain biking and you're out in farm country. I mean, the cycling doesn't get much better. So maybe Colorado, but yeah. So
we like to think we're pretty good over here.
Yeah. But I always, I think anytime I consult with a patient, I'm pretty philosophical about injury and pain. And, I always say, what's the silver lining here? Like, this is going to force you to slow down and, examine yourself, right? Across a number of different fronts. And I think that if you don't, that you're not going to get on the other side of that injury. Or if you do, you're not going to be as robust as you potentially could. So all of my injuries, I had deep learnings, and it really gave me perspective. And that's, ultimately what I try to share with people.
Yeah, if you're not, you might know it actually. I assume you do. And again, for anyone who follows Chris, he's one of the more quick to reference something from 1992 or the study in JOSPT. And again, I'd love to hear how you stay up on some of that research. And I think you just it's again part of your the way your brain works and the nature of that. But the other thing, kind of in that line of what you just said, I always reference The Gift of Injury, which is a book that was written by Stuart McGill, the spine guy. Considered one of the most gurus or experts in spine biomechanics in the world. And he wrote that with Brian Carroll, a powerlifter, and they kind of talk about their journey. But I just go into that concept of the gift of injury. Hey, you're here, you have this surgery, like this is a chance to get better coming out of it. And again, that comes a little bit from my own experience tearing my ACL in 2008. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of wisdom there. And again, I'll just point out again, Chris is, I don't think you were ever like, go, even in New York City. I think there was a little bit of that. But you sound so zen, man. You sound so zen.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, maybe Seattle does that. Maybe kids do that. But
maybe.
Yeah. And hopefully that's something that, I bring into my clinical work, because I think that people are spinning when they come to see us, and there's a lot of uncertainty and anxiety. And, I think that it's very helpful to have a calming effect, to slow people down, let them sort of process what they're going through, let them sit with their thoughts. So yeah, I put up something yesterday. I hang out with a fellow in Seattle named Peter Schmidt, who's just a brilliant thinker. He's an acupuncturist, but he's a philosopher poet to me. And we were talking, and we were walking around his garden, and he had I asked him if I could take a picture of the Buddha, and because he had a statue in his garden, and he always said, Chris, we all want permanence and control, and the reality is we face impermanence and diminishing control. But yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, but I'm glad that you feel like I'm Zen. I think it's an important attribute for people who are seeking our care as rehab pros.
Yeah, and again, I think you do, not to keep just plugging your course, but again, a little bit of why we're here, and I think you did an excellent job in there talking about and adding those little bits where I think some other courses I've taken over the years don't do as good of a job of addressing that, but respecting that process as well as respecting that relationship that this person is here to see us, and kind of speaking to that biopsychosocial model and getting into a little bit of the nitty gritty of that. This is a person who, what is the impact on their identity, not just that they're injured. And I think sometimes, again, in physical therapy school, going all the way back, there's certainly an emphasis talking about these concepts, but I think you do a really great job of bringing a very different kind of perspective to it that, again, I've been practicing since 2008, got my doctorate, and even before then working with humans in some capacity in their fitness and health space. And, like I said, I just went through this almost 20 years into it, and, still gleaning a lot of those little insights that sometimes it's easy to either overlook or just we need to hear it again. And I think in that slightly different perspective that you bring. So again, for anyone out there, no matter how experienced you are, especially if you're in that running space, and again, I don't even see that many runners. I want to share that piece too. Like I'm here in Boulder. There's so many running expert PTs and things like that. And I'm not looking to, steal that niche from anyone. But if a runner comes across, and even if it's a very recreational runner, I think I take a lot of the ability to talk to that concept. And I'm happy to refer out in those situations, and especially in those bone stress injuries. I think we all as clinicians should be very aware of that. Because again, if somebody's coming to you, you mentioned in the course, again, direct access, for anyone not familiar, that's where, again, you're like, hey, my knee's bugging me. Let me go see Chris first. Or let me go see Bo first before I go to my orthopedic surgeon. And it saves a lot of the kind of runaround, but you got to hope and trust that clinician in front of you that they know what they're talking about and might be able to catch that bone stress injury just based on the things we're saying. So, and again, sometimes even a phone call or video call can get us that information. But yeah, I think it's very, again, just to keep kind of, applauding you and just want to share my gratitude for what you brought into this world in this course. And I know how much work you put into it. And again, it's a beast of a course. But I'm still going to go back and go through a few things, even the table torsion test. And again, it's easy to miss some of the specifics because Chris is a very detail-oriented person, which I appreciate. And so again, as a clinician, I think we should all be that detail-oriented. So again, I just wanted to share that gratitude to you of again, picking those things up. And anyone out there, again, go check out the course.
Yeah, I think that, when we're in these clinical situations, that it's easy to default to talking about biomechanics, strength, program, and those are all very important too. I don't want to diminish their role, but I also think we need to zoom out and say, who is this person in front of us? And I don't have any goals when I'm working with someone. They connect with me to troubleshoot their situation, but I think that looking at what are the points of truth here, like what can we agree on, because we're completely ignorant to someone's situation unless we've worked with them before. And even then things change. So it's important to me to make sure that, if there are other factors, what's the dynamic at home? If you have a young athlete, hey, tell me about what's going on at school. What do you and your friends like to do? Have you gotten into any challenging situations? Maybe someone's getting bullied, you never know. So I think that we have to create the time and space for conversations like that to happen, while also realizing we're not a psychologist, but we need to look at, okay, are there any other possible referrals that need to be made here? Because I always get concerned, especially with the bone stress injuries, that, yeah, this may manifest as an MSK or musculoskeletal issue, but there's a whole hell of a lot more going on than just that. When you have an injury that works its way down to the bone, that's not a traumatic injury, like someone fell off their bike. In my case, I had a clavicle fracture from a high impact collision. When you have something that's an atraumatic injury that's worked its way down to the bone, like something's up, right? And you're trying to identify what were the behaviors and practices that engendered this. And don't expect people to come clean and be transparent unless they first feel seen and validated. And only then can you start to really, communicate and trust the information that they're providing. So yeah, and that's not easy. I sucked at this, right? I've always been present with people, but I think as you spend more time in the field, you start getting good at pattern recognition. You start connecting the dots, you stay up on the literature. That only allows you to leverage some of those non-specific effects in sitting there and being with the person, as opposed to, collecting a bunch of BS data that, really has no bearing on things. So I think it was Stephen George, the researcher from University of Florida. I believe he's still there. Maybe he relocated, but, and I'm probably bastardizing this, but he said 95% of the objective data you collect during an initial eval is bullshit, and then you concoct this, this rosy note that tries to explain a very complex situation. So,
yeah. One other thing that you talk about, I did want to touch on, is REDS. If you want to go a little deeper in that, I also saw you either share another clinician. Is it a REDS? Like, is it a certification that she did? I forgot her name right now. I think you shared it yesterday, literally.
Yeah, Rebecca McConville. So, I got introduced to her through my buddy Nathan Carlson, who's another world authority on bone stress injuries. They're both in Kansas City. I always get confused. I think they work in, I think they both work in Kansas, but live in Missouri, So, but yeah, they're in the Midwest, and yeah, that woman is just a wealth of knowledge and information. And for ease of explanation, she wrote the book on relative energy deficiency in sport called Finding Your Sweet Spot. And she's also, she has someone who has crystallized intelligence. She was a competitive athlete. She's a mother. She's OG in my book. But she's awesome. She's a great follow.
Yeah, and I did that as soon, again, anything, and, Chris even posted about a book about drinking, giving up drinking, and we don't have to dive too deep into that piece of it, but I was like, cool, I'm going to check this out. I don't know if I'll give up drinking, but I understand the precipice and the concept. A little different for everyone. I was like, yeah, I don't mind doing that 30 days at a time, but I don't know how long I can really do that. And again, I do think the research does show, again, without getting too deep on the alcohol piece of it all, but Chris, you're still kind of like pushing the competitive edge as well, too, right? As an athlete yourself.
Yeah, I'll get off the podcast and I'll go out for a 2-hour ride, and that's a run of the mill session.
And you were working out right before we started, too.
Yeah, I tend to. I was joking with my friend, and I said my home office, and this is a guy who got me into triathlon back in New York, and he's a British guy, and he said, Chris, that would qualify as a home gym to me. Because I have my squat rack, I have my CompuTrainer, my Wahoo kicker right next to me. But yeah, I've been very fortunate to sort of blend all this stuff together. So yeah, certain aspects are work, but it's also fun. And I think that fosters alliance with people. They know that I face a lot of the same battles, and even more so as a master's level athlete. I can't get away with a lot of the stuff that I did in New York. And with the drinking piece, I don't fault people for drinking. Look, we lived in New York City. If you wanted to go out and see music, it was a 2-drink minimum. That was just so much a part of the culture. But the thing that really changed for me is one day, my wife or partner Mimi was shopping with our kids, and my son said, "Should we get Daddy beer?" And that was like. That was probably a catalyst in hindsight. because I didn't want him to start to normalize that is something that, or associate that with me. So now I drink non-alcoholic beer, and he's always like, "Dad, I thought you didn't drink beer." I'm like, so I'm like, well, it looks like beer, but it's not beer, buddy. So
Yeah.
but yeah, I have a few
That's
years on
becoming
you.
a very popular thing. Athletic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll be looking, this will turn the same color as yours soon.
Yeah.
I'm sure. I don't know if I want to take on, again, the course. It sounded like putting the course together probably put a few extra grades in there for you.
It did. It was one of those things that an ethereal force overtook me. But I think that, for anyone who is working on a big project, it's very easy to get it about 60 to 70% of the way there. And, one of my buddy, Ryan DeBell, who, he sent me this image, and he said, "First make it exist, and then you can make it better." He said, "Chris, you can't do a bridge that's 70% of the way done. You need to finish the damn bridge so people can drive over it." Right. And, that was sort of an impetus, because you'll come up with a million excuses, and you just need to really figure out your workflows. And, fortunately, Mimi supports me. She was basically like, "I'm not going to bother you. You're off in who knows what land." But yeah, the final 12 weeks, I did burn the candle from both ends. And, and I pulled back on my training, though. I said, I'm going to train 1 hour a day. I'll do movement snacks, and you can't have it all, right? You got to make concessions. If you're going to turn up one knob, you got to turn another knob down. And I think that's a tough thing for people to do, because they get on these schedules, or they're on the merry-go-round and they don't want to get off.
And that takes us to our last topic you wanted to talk about, is burnout. You put patient burnout. I think you meant clinician burnout, and here we are. and so burnout in all sorts of aspects. But love to hear where what you feel about that. And again, maybe even going back to that entrepreneurial endeavors, which is a fun tongue twister. Entrepreneurial endeavors.
Yeah, I mean, I see a lot of physical therapists and rehab pros that reached out to me in the past 5 years, and continue to reach out. And that's definitely a common denominator. They've lost their passion. And I would say, anytime I recognize apathy, whether that's with a clinician who's looking for mentoring, or if it's an athlete where they're no longer interested in like their sport, they're still doing it, but maybe they're not doing it with the same zest or passion or energy. To me, that's a flag. And I think that's a time to sort of take a step back and audit yourself. And there's probably different factors that drive that burnout. I think with clinicians, a lot of it's probably rushing from one patient to the next and not providing the care that they know that they're capable of, and then getting bogged down with documentation. And I think that starts to bleed over into other aspects of their life. And, the outlet is they finish work and then they go home, and rather than sort of, fill their cup, they default to social, because their brain is sort of cooked. They're drained from the day. And then all of a sudden that starts becoming a vicious cycle. So, I think when I talk to clinicians, and I do a lot of mentoring these days, I don't advertise that. I let people get to me organically, but you'll see a mentorship option for a 90-minute call on my website. And the first thing I do is walk me through your daily routine. And then from there, what if you could wave a magic wand or rub a genie lamp, and you could have all your wishes come true tomorrow? I want you to tell me what that looks like. And as they start to answer those questions, they start mapping out their own course. And it's funny how once you put things down on paper, that suddenly they have a funny way of taking shape. So we're in an amazing field. I think that we couldn't be better positioned, whether you're a PT, a chiro, because AI is not coming for our job, right? I think that's one area where AI is weak, and it can provide advice or suggestions if you're navigating something, but unless someone really understands all the moving parts and there's a human connection, that we have job security, and I think it's only going to become that much more so. So, Yeah, but the burnout's a real thing. I see it across all the rehab professions, and I don't think it's a money issue. Maybe in certain instances, people may feel like they're overworked and underpaid, but I think it's people, start losing control of the clinical interaction and a lot of the stuff that just goes with the territory. But I mean, that's how we can leverage AI. I was looking at Chris Hewen, who's a great guy that runs the E3 Rehab podcast, and he put up a picture of pen and paper today, and he said, "This is how I do my evals." And there was a fellow who chimed in and said, "I can't do that because I have to write up the note afterward." And I'm thinking, no, you don't. You could take that sheet of paper, so long as there's no private health information, and just put it in the chat and just say, "Hey, can you convert this into a SOAP note?" And then you plug in the private health information afterward. So documentation is no longer an excuse, right? So, but also, what's life look like outside of PT? What are you reading that has nothing to do with PT? I think that's really important. Just as much as I read all the research, if you look at my bookshelf, I'll have, books about running. I have books about, stoicism. I have books about, I just finished The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry from John Mark Comer, who's a pastor at a church in the outskirts of Portland. So I think reading things, which is going to get you looking at life and the world through different lenses. The people I have the most respect for are the ones who look at a situation from a 360-degree lens. Those are the most brilliant thinkers, which I love. I try to surround myself with those people.
Well, I want to be respectful of your time. That again, you keep going deeper and deeper into and more Zen. Seems like every word you say is more Zen somehow. But yes, I want to be respectful of your time. I want to feel like we could keep going and would love to, continue to hear and learn more from you. I think I'm going to do that. I'm going to go back and revisit a few of the lectures from the course that we did here. So guys, go check out chrisjohnsonpt.com. The Clinical Running Essentials course there. I think you'll find it easily there. Use code BONEKNOWS. Save $100. That's the easy way to connect with Chris. Go follow him on all the socials. He does a great job. If you don't start marching and pogo jumping and flow roping, you're missing the boat there. And so again, I appreciate you, Chris, for all you brought to me personally, and to my practice that I can pass on to my patients. And again, even those little tweaks on the long lever bridge, fantastic stuff like that. Any parting words for the listeners?
Well, I appreciate anyone who takes the time to check out my content, who drops a note. I'm still on the journey, just like you. I have no reservations about putting out content. Your feedback helps me tighten up my understanding how I present this material. And I just want to, send a heartfelt thanks to you for all of your feedback as you comb through that course. I was like, holy shit, Bo finished the course, and
I was the first, unofficially the first.
Yeah. But then you were like, hey, it still says I have 40%. And you're like, are those all the exercises and videos? I'm like, yeah, I mean, that's a big part of what we do, right? But, the whole goal is always, taking complex stuff and trying to make it simple and actionable and to get results, right? I see people complicating the snot out of stuff, and I don't think you need to do that. This course was whittling things down, anything that made its way into that course, it had to pass that test. Is this essential? Which is why I called it Clinical Running Essentials. If it was something that I did not prescribe or include or do during that week, it didn't make the cut. So we don't need more; we need less. So that was sort of the whole thought behind that course. And so thanks to everyone who's invested in it. It's I'm going to treat it as SaaS, software as a system. So when you invest in it, you get updates. So long as I have a pulse, and I'm constantly tinkering with things. So I hope it leaves you in a better place than it found you. And it's always a pleasure to connect with you, buddy. And I'm glad to see you as a dad and living the Rocky Mountain High lifestyle.
Yes, sir. Appreciate it. We'll sign off here, and guys, go